Hi, today's topic is about regional and economic integration. What is regional integration? It is a process in which neighboring countries enter into an agreement in order to upgrade cooperation through common institutions and rules. The objectives of the agreement could range from economic to political to environmental, although it has typically taken the form of political economy initiative, where commercial interests are the focus for achieving broader socio-political and security objectives as defined by national governments. Regional integration has been organized either via supranational institutional structures or through intergovernmental decision making or a combination of both. Past efforts at regional integration have often focused on removing barriers to free trade in the region, increasing the free movement of people, labor, goods, and capital across national borders, reducing the possibility of regional armed conflict, for example, through confidence and security building measures, and adopting cohesive regional stances on policy issues such as the environment, climate change, and migration. What is intra regional trade? It refers to trade which focuses on economic exchange, primarily between countries of the same region or economic zone. In recent years, countries within economic trade regimes, such as ASEAN in Southeast Asia, for example, have increased the level of trade and commodity exchange between themselves, which reduces the inflation and tariff barriers associated with foreign markets, resulting in growing prosperity. Regional integration has been defined as a process through which independent national states voluntarily mingle, merge, and mix with their neighbors so as to lose the factual attributes of sovereignty while acquiring new techniques for resolving conflicts among themselves. De Lombardi and Van Langhoff describe it as a worldwide phenomena of territorial systems that increases the interactions between their components, and it creates new form of organization coexisting with traditional forms of state-led organization at the national level. Some scholars see regional integration simply as the process by which states within a particular region increase their level interaction with regard to economic, security, political, or social or cultural issues. So, in short, regional integration is joining of individual countries or states within a region into a larger whole. The degree of integration depends upon the willingness and commitment of independent sovereign states to share their sovereignty. The deep integration that focuses on regulating the business environment in a more general sense is faced with many difficulties. Regional integration initiatives, according to Van Langhoff, should fulfill at least 8 important functions. And what are those functions? One, strengthening of trade interaction in the region, the creation of an appropriate enabling environment for private sector development, the development of infrastructure programs in support of economic growth and regional integration, the development of strong public sector institutions and good governance, the reduction of social exclusion and the development of an inclusive civil society, contribution to peace and security in the region, the building of environment programs at the regional level, the strengthening of the region's interaction with other regions of the world. Regional integration arrangements are a part and parcel of the present global economic order, and this trend is now an acknowledged feature of the international scene. It has achieved a new meaning and new significance. Regional integration arrangements are mainly the outcome of necessity felt by nation states to integrate their economies in order to achieve rapid economic development, decrease conflict, and build mutual trust between the integrated units. The nation state system, which has been the predominant pattern of international relations since the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, is evolving towards a system in which regional groupings of states is becoming increasingly important with sovereign states. Some have argued that the idea of the state and its sovereignty has been made irrelevant by the processes that are taking place at both the global and local level. Walter Lippmann believes that the true constituent members of the international order of the future are communities of state. Carr shares Lippmann's view about the rise of regionalism and regional arrangements and commented that the concept of sovereignty is likely to become, in the future, even more blurred and indistinct than it is at present. Regional integration agreements. Now, what are they? The major developments in international relationships and are among many countries. Specifically, it increases the international trade and investment and the formation of regional trading blocs. As fundamental to the multifaceted process of globalization, regional integration has been a major development in the international relations of recent years. As such, regional integration agreements has gained high importance. Not only are almost all the industrial nations part of such agreements, but also a huge number of developing nations too are a part of at least one, and in cases more than one such agreement. The amount of trade that takes place within the scope of such agreements is about 35%, which accounts to more than one third of the trade in the world. The main objective of these agreements is to reduce trade barriers among those nations concerned, but the structure may vary from one agreement to another. The removal of the trade barriers or liberalization of many economies has had multiple impacts, in some cases increasing gross domestic product, but also resulting in greater global inequality, concentration of wealth, and an increasing frequency and intensity of economic crisis. The number of agreements agreed under the rules of General Agreements of Trades and Tariffs and World Trade Organization and signed in each year has dramatically increased since 1990s. There were 194 agreements ratified in 1999, and it contained 94 agreements from the early 90s. The last few years have experienced huge qualitative as well as quantitative changes in the agreements related to regional integration scheme. The top three major changes were the following: deep integration recognition, closed regionalism to open model, advent of trade blocs. The first is deep integration recognition. It analyzes the aspect that effective integration is a much broader aspect, surpassing the idea that reducing tariffs, quotas, and barriers will provide effective solutions. Rather, it recognizes the concept that additional barriers tend to segment the markets, that impedes the free flow of goods and services along with ideas and investments. Hence, it is now recognized that the current framework of traditional trade policies are not adequate enough to tackle these barriers. Such deep integration was first implemented in the Single Market Programme in the European Union. However, in the light of the modern context, that debate is being propounded into the clauses of different regional integration agreements arising out of increase in international trade. The second is closed regionalism to open model. The change from a system of closed regionalism to a more open model had arisen out of the fact that the section of trading blocs that were created among the developing countries during the 1960s and 70s were based on certain specific models, such as those of import substitution, as well as regional agreements coupled with the prevalence generally high external trade barriers. The positive aspects of such shifting is that there has been some restructuring of certain old agreements. The agreements tend to be more forward in their outward approach, as well as show commitment in trying to advance international trade and commerce instead to trying to put a cap on it by way of strict control. What about the trade blocs? The advent of trade blocs tend to draw in some parity between high income industrialist countries and developing nations with a much lower income base, in that they tend to serve as equal partners under such a system. The concept of equal partners grew out of the concept of providing reinforcement to the economies to all the member countries. The various countries then agree upon the fact that they will help economies to maintain the balance of trade between and prohibit the entry of other countries in their trade process. An important example would be the North American Free Trade Area, formed in 1994 when the Canada US Free Trade Agreement was extended to Mexico. Another vibrant example would entail as to how European Union has formed linkages incorporating the transition economies of Eastern Europe through the Europe agreements. It has signed agreements with the majority of Mediterranean countries by highly developing the European Union Turkey Customs Union and a Mediterranean policy. Visegrád 4 is a group of states cooperating in order to achieve higher economic results. Recent regional integrations have been in Europe, where it was consolidated in the Treaty on the European Union, the Maastricht Treaty, which came into force in November 1993 and established the European Union. The European Free Trade Association is a free trade bloc of 4 countries, that are Iceland, Liechtenstein, Switzerland, and Norway, which operates in a parallel and is linked to the European Union. In January 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement was formed when Mexico acceded to a prior existing bilateral free trade agreement between the US and Canada. In the Pacific, there was the ASEAN Free Trade Area in 1993, which looked into reducing the tariffs. The AFTA started in the full swing in 2000. Alternative regional integration. In the last decade, regional integration has accelerated and deepened around the world. In Latin America and North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, with the formation of new alliances and trading blocs. However, critics of the forms of this integration has taken consistently pointed out that the forms of regional integration promoted have often been neoliberal in their character, in line with the motives and values of World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, promoting financial deregulation, removal of barriers to capital and global corporations, their owners and investors, focusing on industrialization, boosting global trade volumes, and increasing GDP. This has been accompanied by a stark increase in global inequality, growing environmental problems as a result of industrial development, the displacement of formerly rural communities, ever expanding urban slums, rising unemployment, and the dismantling of social and environmental protections. Global financial deregulation has also contributed to the increasing frequency and severity of economic crisis, while governments have increasingly lost the sovereignty to take action to protect and foster weakened economies, as they are held to the rules of free trade implemented by the WTO and IMF. Advocates of alternative regional integration argue strongly that the solutions to global crises like financial, economic, environmental, climate, energy, health, food, and social, etc., must involve regional solutions and regional integrations, since they transcend national borders and territories and require the cooperation of different people across geography. However, they propose alternatives to the dominant forms of neoliberal integration, which attends primarily to the needs of transnational corporations and investors. Renowned economist, Harvard professor, former senior vice president, and chief economist of the World Bank, Joseph Stiglitz, has also argued strongly against neoliberal globalization, Stiglitz argues that the deregulation, free trade, and social spending cuts or austerity policies of neoliberal economies have actually created and worsened global crisis. In his 2000 book Globalization and Its Discontents, he explains how the industrialized economies of US, Europe, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan developed not with the neoliberal policies promoted in the developing countries and the global south by the WTO, IMF, and World Bank, but rather with a careful mix of protection, regulation, social support, and intervention from national governments in the market. Now we come to economic integration with the regional integration. Economic integration is the unification of economic policies between states through the partial or full abolition of tariffs and non-tariff restrictions on trades. So European Union is a very good example of economic integration. Having they came up with another currency, that is euro. That is another thing that United Kingdom exited from it later. So, the trade stimulation effects intended by means of economic integration are part of the contemporary economic theory of the second best, wherein theory the best option is free trade with free competition and no trade barriers whatsoever. Free trade is treated as an idealistic option, and although realized within certain developed states, economic integration has been thought of as the second best option for global trade where barriers to full free trade exist. Economic integration is meant in turn to lead to lower prices for distributors and consumers with the goal of increasing the level of welfare while leading to an increase of economic productivity of the states. What has been the objective of such economic integration? There are economic as well as political reasons for it. Why nations pursue economic integration? Because of the economic rationale. And what is that? So the economic rationale for the increase of trade between member states of economic union rests on the supposed productivity gains from integration. This is one of the reasons for the development of economic integration on a global scale, a phenomena now realized in continental economic blocs such as ASEAN, NAFTA, and the European Union. So AFCFTA and the Euro-Asian Economic Community and proposed for the intercontinental economic blocs such as Comprehensive Economic Partnership for East Asia and Transatlantic Free Trade Area. Comparative advantages refers to the ability of a person or a country to produce a particular good or service at a lower marginal and opportunity cost over another. Comparative advantage was first described by David Ricardo, who explained in his 1817 book on the principles of political economy and taxation in an example involving England and Portugal. In Portugal, it is possible to produce both wine and cloth with less labor than it would take to produce the same quantities in England. However, the relative costs of producing those two goods are different in the two countries. In England, it is very hard to produce wine and only moderately difficult to produce cloth. In Portugal, both are easy to produce. Therefore, while it is cheaper to produce cloth in Portugal than England, it is cheaper still for Portugal to produce excess wine and trade that for English cloth. Conversely, England benefits from this trade because its cost for producing cloth has not changed, but it can now get wine at a lower price, closer to the cost of cloth. The conclusion drawn is that each country can gain by specializing in the good where it has comparative advantage and trading that good for the other. Then next is economies of scale. And what does economies of scale mean? It refers to the cost advantage that an enterprise obtains due to the expansion or because of this bigger scale. There are factors that cause a producer's average cost per unit to fall as the scale of output is increased. Economies of scale is a long run concept and refers to reductions in unit cost as the size of facility and the usage level of other inputs increases. Economies of scale is also a justification for economic integration, since some economies of scale may require a larger market than is possible within a particular country. For example, it would not be efficient for Lycastine to have its own car maker if they would only sell to their local market. A lone car maker may be profitable, however, if they export cars to global markets in addition to selling to the local market. Besides these economic reasons, the primary reason why economic integration has been pursued in practice are largely political. The Zollverein on German Customs Union of 1867 paved the way for partial German unification under Prussian leadership in 1871. Imperial free trade was proposed in the late 19th century to strengthen the loosening ties within the British Empire, which eventually became unsuccessful. So, the European Economic Community was created to integrate France and Germany's economies to the point that they would find it impossible to go to war with each other. And what have been the success factors for these economic integrations? Among the requirements for successful development of economic integration are permanency in its evolution, that is, a gradual expansion and over time a higher degree of economic or political unification, and that is a formula for sharing joint revenues like customs duties and licensing, etc., between the member states, counting per capita, and a process for adopting decisions both economically and politically, and a will to make concessions between developed and developing states of the Union. A coherence policy is a must for the permanent development of economic unions, being also a property of the economic integration process. Historically, the success of European coal and steel community opened a way for the formation of European Economic Community, which involved much more than just the two sectors in ECSC. So, a coherence policy was implemented to use a different speed of economic unification applied both to economic sectors and economic policies. Implementation of the coherence principle in adjusting economic policies in the member states of economic bloc causes economic integration effects. What have been the stages of such integration? So, the degree of economic integration can be categorized into 7 stages: preferential trading area, free trade area, customs union, single market, economic union, economic and monetary union, and complete economic integration. So, these differ in the degree of unification of economic policies, with the highest one being the complete economic integration of the states, and which would most likely involve political integration as well. A free trade area is formed when at least two states partially or fully abolish customs tariffs on their inner border to exclude regional exploitation of zero tariffs within the free trade area. There is a rule of certificate of origin for the goods originating from the territory of member state of in a free trade area. A customs union introduces unified tariffs on the exterior borders of the union. A monetary union introduces a shared currency. A common market add to a free trade area the free movement of services, capital, and labor. An economic union combines customs union with a common market. A fiscal union introduces a shared fiscal and budgetary policy. In order to be successful, the more advanced integration steps are typically accompanied by unification of economic policies such as tax, social welfare, etc., reductions in the rest of the trade barriers, introduction of supranational bodies, and gradual moves towards the final stage, a political union. What are the advantages of economic integration? The first is trade creation. Member countries have wider selection of goods and services not previously available. They can acquire goods and services at a lower cost after trade barriers due to um, lower tariffs or removal of tariffs, then encourage more trade between member countries. The balance of money spent from cheaper goods and services can be used to buy more products and services. Then greater consensus. Unlike World Trade Organization with huge membership like 147 countries, easier to gain consensus among small memberships in regional integration. Then political cooperation. A group of nations can have significantly greater political influence than each nation would have individually. This integration is an essential strategy to address the effects of conflicts and political instability that may affect the region. Useful tool to handle the social and economic challenges associated with globalization. Then employment opportunities. As economic integration encourages trade liberalization and leads to market expansion, more investment into the country and greater diffusion of technology, it creates more employment opportunities for people to move from one country to another to find the jobs or to earn higher pay. For example, industries requiring most unskilled labor tends to shift production to low wage countries within a regional cooperation. What are the disadvantages of economic integration? So, first is creation of trading blocs. It can also increase trade barriers against non member countries. There can be a trade diversion. Because of trade barriers, trade is diverted from a non member country to a member country despite the inefficiency in cost. For example, a country has to stop trading with a low cost manufacturer in a non member country and trade with a manufacturer in a member country which has a higher cost. Then, national sovereignty. It requires member countries to give up some degree of control over the key policies like trade, monetary, and fiscal policies. The higher the level of integration, the greater the degree of controls that needs to be given up, particularly in the case of a political union, economic integration, which requires nations to give up a high degree of sovereignty. These are the references. Thank you for listening.